September 13, 1945. A yellow measuring tape. 52 women preparing to die. And the American quartermaster who had no idea he was holding the key to everything they'd been taught to fear about mercy. The air in Manila Processing Center felt like breathing through wet wool. 98 degrees, the kind of heat that made thinking difficult and breathing harder. The humidity wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. The smell of mildew mixed with fear creating an odor that would haunt this room for decades. Sergeant William Crawford stood at the front of the processing station holding standard military equipment. Item 7A from the quartermaster kit, a measuring tape. 60 inches of yellow fabric with black numbers printed every half inch. Nothing special, nothing threatening, just a tool. But the 52 women staring at that tape saw something completely different. Crawford was 32 years old, born and raised on a corn farm outside Des Moines, Iowa. He'd processed over 3,000 prisoners of war in the past 18 months. Germans who spat at him, Italians who cursed his mother in colorful Mediterranean fashion, Japanese men who tried to bite him during measurements. He'd seen every kind of resistance, every form of defiance. But he had never seen this. Crawford spoke 3 words in broken Japanese. The kind of Japanese you learn from a water-damaged phrase book in desperation. "Tell us your measurements." The reaction was instant and terrifying. 52 women froze. Some started shaking. Their hands trembled. Their breathing became shallow and rapid. One woman in the back row fell to her knees. Another gripped the edge of a metal chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Several started crying silently, tears streaming down faces that remained completely expressionless. Crawford's confusion was genuine and complete. What the hell just happened? In the third row, 24-year-old Keiko Tanaka felt her stomach drop. The sensation was physical, like falling, like the ground disappearing beneath her feet. Her hand moved instinctively to her right pocket. Inside that pocket, wrapped in a piece of torn cloth, was a razor blade. She'd stolen it from a medical dispensary 3 weeks ago. She'd practiced the motion 147 times. 3 seconds to locate the carotid artery, 20 seconds to unconsciousness, 40 seconds to death if no one intervened. She had the technique perfected. Keiko's mind filled with images, not memories, training. 6 mandatory film screenings between 1943 and August 1945. 6 times sitting in a locked room watching grainy footage. 6 times hearing the same message delivered in increasingly desperate tones. The Americans will measure you, then they will photograph you. Then comes what we cannot show on film. 0% of women captured by Americans maintain their honor. 0% return unchanged. The films had been clear, explicit, horrifying. Women lined up against walls, measuring tapes wrapped around their bodies, cameras flashing. Then the screen went black and the narrator's voice described what happened next in clinical, devastating detail. Keiko and the other 51 women in this room believed those films were truth, documentary evidence of American brutality. They had no way of knowing the films were propaganda, staged by the Kempe Tai using Korean actresses forced to act terrified. Scenes of American atrocities that were actually footage of Japanese crimes in Nanking and Manila, edited and reversed. But in this moment in this room with Crawford holding that yellow tape, the distinction between truth and propaganda didn't matter. To these women, the measuring tape was the first step in a sequence that ended with their destruction. Crawford noticed something wrong with the woman in the third row, Keiko. He didn't know her name yet, wouldn't learn it for another 50 years. But he recognized her stance. Combat veterans develop an instinct for desperation, for people about to do something irreversible. Her weight was shifted wrong. Too far back on her heels. Her breathing was too controlled, not calm, controlled, the kind of control that comes from making a decision. Her hand in her pocket wasn't fidgeting or nervous. It was gripping something, holding it, ready. Crawford had seen this before. Normandy, Belgium, men who'd decided death was preferable to whatever came next. The posture was unmistakable. "Something is very wrong here," he said to Corporal Hayes standing beside him. "Very, very wrong. But before we understand why these women wanted to die, we need to understand what the Imperial Japanese Army showed them. 6 times in rooms with locked doors, with films that would haunt them until this very moment. The story begins 7 years earlier, 1938. Osaka City Hospital. Keiko worked as a civilian nurse, 24 beds in her ward, mostly elderly patients. Some children. She was good at her job, efficient, compassionate, the kind of nurse who remembered everyone's name and their family members and whether they preferred their tea hot or lukewarm. Her mother, Mrs. Tanaka, had sewn Keiko's white nurse uniform by hand. The fitting had taken an entire afternoon. Keiko stood in her childhood bedroom while her mother measured and pinned and adjusted. The measuring tape her mother used was soft cloth, yellowed with age, inherited from Keiko's grandmother, who'd been a seamstress. 24 inches, her mother announced, measuring Keiko's waist. Perfect for your age, Keiko-chan. You'll grow into a beautiful woman. That measuring tape was gentle, loving, constructive. The fabric soft against Keiko's skin through her slip. Her mother's hands careful and practiced. The whole experience felt like care made physical, like being seen and valued and shaped with intention. Keiko had no idea that 7 years later another measuring tape would nearly kill her. The war came slowly to Osaka, first as news from China, then rumors from the Pacific, then rationing, then the uniforms started appearing everywhere. Then the recruiters came to the hospital. March 1943, a lieutenant from the Imperial Japanese Army Medical Corps addressed the nursing staff. 23 women assembled in the break room. The lieutenant's speech was efficient, patriotic, compelling in its simplicity. The Emperor needs skilled medical personnel. Our soldiers deserve the best care. You have the training, you have the skill. Your country asks you to volunteer. Volunteer was a polite word for something that wasn't quite mandatory but wasn't quite optional either. 7 nurses from Osaka City Hospital joined the military that week. Keiko was one of them. Her mother cried when she heard, not because she was proud, because she was terrified, but she sewed Keiko's military uniform anyway. One last fitting, one last afternoon of measuring and pinning and adjusting. 24 inches, her mother said again, voice breaking. You haven't changed, Keiko-chan. You're still my girl. 3 months later, Keiko shipped out to Mindanao. 2 years of service followed. Hard years, brutal years, years that changed her in ways measuring tapes couldn't capture. And then came the films. The first screening happened in March 1943, right after basic training. Every woman in the medical corps was required to attend. The room was underground. No windows. One door that locked from the outside. Wooden chairs ranged in rows. A projector set up in the back. The film was titled American Documentation Protocol. 23 minutes long, black and white, grainy footage that looked authentic because parts of it were authentic, just not the parts they claimed. The film showed American soldiers with measuring tapes, women being measured, height, chest, waist, hips, the measurements being recorded on clipboards. The women's faces showed fear, real fear, because those actresses had been threatened with death if they didn't perform convincingly. The narrator's voice was calm, clinical, matter of fact. Americans catalog everything before destruction. They are methodical, scientific. They measure their victims like livestock being prepared for slaughter. This documentation serves 2 purposes. First, military records for their war crimes tribunals. Second, personal souvenirs for the soldiers conducting the measurements. The film showed more measuring, closer shots. The tape wrapped around a woman's chest, around her waist, the numbers being called out and written down. Then the camera zoomed in on the measuring tape itself, yellow fabric, black numbers, 60 inches long. This tape, the narrator continued, is how they mark you for humiliation. Remember its color, remember its purpose. If you see this tape, you know what comes next. The screen went black. The film ended. The lights came on. 23 women sat in silence. Some were crying, others looked numb. All of them had just been taught to fear a measuring tape. 5 more screenings followed over the next 2 years, each one more explicit, each one showing more of the sequence. Measuring, then photographing, then activities the narrator described in increasingly graphic detail, but never fully showed. By the 6th screening in August 1945, 1 week before Japan's surrender, the message had been hammered home with psychological precision. If captured by Americans, you will be measured. What follows is worse than death. Therefore, death before capture is not just acceptable. It is honorable. It is required. Lieutenant Tanaka, the propaganda officer who narrated the films, held up a measuring tape during that final screening. The same yellow fabric, the same black numbers. Sisters, she said, using the term deliberately creating false intimacy through shared victimhood. If you see this tape in American hands, you will know your time has come. Better to die by your own hand. Better to choose the moment. Better to maintain your honor than to give them the satisfaction of taking it. 3 women in that screening attempted suicide within 24 hours. 2 succeeded. Only 89 Japanese women were captured during the entire Philippines campaign. These 52 represented the largest single group ever processed at one time. And every single one of them had seen those films. Every single one of them believed the measuring tape meant the beginning of something worse than death. Now in the Manila Processing Center on September 13, 1945, at 2:47 in the afternoon, Sergeant William Crawford stood holding that exact tape. The standard issue tape, regulation equipment. He had no idea he was holding a weapon loaded with 2 years of psychological warfare. Crawford tried again. He gestured with the tape, pointed to a form on his clipboard. Standard form QM424, used for every soldier, sailor, and prisoner who needed clothing. Nothing special, nothing sinister, just bureaucracy. "We need your measurements," he repeated through the Filipino interpreter, "for uniform requisition." But the interpreter's Japanese wasn't military Japanese. It wasn't even good Japanese. Roberto Santos was 26 years old. He'd learned the language during 2 years, 9 months, and 13 days as a prisoner of war. At Camp O'Donnell, from guards who weren't kind, from men who used Japanese as a weapon, not a communication tool. Roberto's Japanese vocabulary was prison Japanese. Harsh, brutal, limited to commands and insults and threats. When he tried to translate uniform requisition, his brain reached for words it knew, words it had heard, words associated with humiliation and violation. What Crawford said, "We need your measurements for uniform requisition forms." What Roberto translated, "We require your private body measurements for documentation." The word he used for measurements was shintai no sunpo, body measurements. But the modifier he added trying to specify what kind of measurements came out as kojinteki, private, personal, intimate. Every woman in that room heard, "We require your intimate private measurements for documentation." Confirmation of everything the films promised. Validation of every fear they'd carried for years. The sequence was beginning. The measuring tape had appeared. What came next was inevitable. Crawford, oblivious to the mistranslation, tried to demonstrate. He wrapped the tape around his own chest, over his uniform. Nothing invasive, nothing threatening. "Chest 42 inches, he called out. Roberto translated, "Mune no himitsu yonjuni," chest secret 42. The word himitsu meant secret, hidden, private. It was wrong, completely wrong. The correct word would have been sunpo or saizu, measurement or size, neutral, clinical. But Roberto's PTSD brain, triggered by the setting and the women and the tape, defaulted to the vocabulary of trauma. Crawford wrapped the tape around his waist. Waist 34 inches. Roberto Onaka no Kakusareta Sanjuyon. Stomach hidden, part 34. Every translation made it worse. Every word Crawford spoke emerged from Roberto's mouth laden with implications of invasion and violation. The measuring tape that Crawford thought was demonstrating harmless procedure became proof of the women's worst nightmares. 3 women started crying openly now. Not silent tears anymore. Audible sobbing, hands covering their faces, bodies shaking. Crawford stopped. What the hell is happening? But the answer was complex, layered, built from years of propaganda and weeks of mistranslation in this moment of cultural collision where nothing meant what anyone thought it meant. In her chair, Keiko's thumb found the edge of the razor blade through the cloth, sharp, ready. She'd practiced this. She knew exactly where to cut, exactly how deep, exactly how long she had before unconsciousness took the pain away. Better death than documentation. Better honor than survival without it. The room temperature was 91 degrees, but several women were visibly shivering. The pencils that had been scratching on forms stopped. Even the American soldiers who didn't understand Japanese could sense something had gone catastrophically wrong. The tension was visible. like electricity before lightning strikes. Crawford noticed Keiko's stance changing, watched her weight shift, saw her hand tighten in her pocket. He'd been at Normandy. He'd seen men in that position before, the position that came right before violence. Usually violence turned inward. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Then louder to Corporal Hayes, get Lieutenant Bennett, now. Sir, she's in surgery. I don't care if she's operating on General MacArthur himself. Get her here in 5 minutes, or we'll have 23 dead women on our hands. Hayes ran, actually ran, not walked quickly. Ran because Crawford's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Something terrible was about to happen, and they had minutes, not hours, to prevent it. The weight felt infinite, measured in heartbeats and held breath. 97 seconds that stretched like hours. Tropical birds screamed outside the windows, their calls sharp and chaotic. Inside, 52 women barely breathed. The fan overhead clicked with each rotation. Metal blades cutting humid air that did nothing to cool anyone, just pushed the heat around in useless circles. Sweat dripped onto concrete floors, the sound audible in the silence. Drip, 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 like a countdown timer, like something measuring time until an inevitable event. Roberto Santos stood frozen phrase book clutched in sweating hands. Something was wrong, he knew it, could feel it, but couldn't identify what he'd done wrong. Couldn't pinpoint the moment his translations had transformed routine into crisis. The measuring tape lay on the floor now where Crawford had dropped it, coiled like a yellow snake. 60 inches of fabric that had somehow become the most dangerous object in the room. More threatening than guns, more lethal than blades, because it carried the weight of belief, of propaganda so effective, it had transformed a tool into a weapon through nothing but perception. Keiko's breathing was wrong, too controlled, too steady. Crawford recognized it, the breathing of someone who'd made a decision, someone who was counting down their own final moments. Someone who'd chosen their exit and was simply waiting for the right instant. He wanted to say something, anything, but what he didn't speak Japanese beyond broken phrases, didn't understand what had caused this terror, didn't know about the films or the propaganda or the 2 years of psychological conditioning that had prepared these women for this exact moment. All he knew was that something in his processing procedure had triggered 52 women to prepare for death, and he had no idea how to fix it. Footsteps in the corridor, different from military boots, lighter, faster, a woman's footsteps, running. The door burst open. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett entered the room. 28 years old, Army Nurse Corps, born and raised in St. Cloud, Minnesota, served in North Africa, Italy, seen men die at Anzio while she operated in a tent hospital under German artillery fire. Lost her fiancé on January 22, 1944, 200 yards from where she was saving other men's lives. She'd continued operating through the shelling, saved 38 men that night, couldn't save the one who mattered most. So she'd made a promise to a dead man and a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. If I couldn't save him, I'll save everyone else. No exceptions. Bennett took one look at the room and understood immediately. Not the details, not the why, but the what. This was a suicide watch scenario. Everything about the scene screamed it. The positioning, the body language, the atmosphere of finality. She'd done psychiatric rotations at Walter Reed in 1943, knew the checklist. Backs to walls, check. Hands hidden, check. Shallow breathing, check. Eyes tracking exits, check. At least one person in committed posture, check. This wasn't a processing problem. This was a crisis. Bennett's voice cut through the tension like a blade, clean, sharp, authoritative. All male personnel out, now. Crawford started to protest. Ma'am, this is my processing station. These are my forms. Sergeant Crawford, I'm a captain. You're a sergeant. I outrank you. Bennett's eyes never left the women. And more importantly, I'm right. These women think you're about to assault them. Out. The words hung in the humid air. Assault. The word no one had wanted to say. But Bennett had learned something at Anzio. Sometimes the truth spoken plainly was less terrifying than implications left unspoken. Crawford understood immediately. He'd suspected something like this. The terror, the preparation for violence. It all made sudden horrible sense. Yes, ma'am. He gestured to his men. Everyone out. Female personnel only. The evacuation took 67 seconds. Boots on concrete. Door opening, door closing, the sound of male voices receding down the corridor. Remaining in the room, Bennett. PFC Alice Anderson, 22 from Ohio, female clerk who'd been taking notes. And Roberto Santos because someone had to translate. Though Bennett was beginning to suspect the translation was part of the problem. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Not relaxed, still tense, still terrified, but different, breathable. Three women started crying in a new way. Not fear tears, relief tears. The kind of crying that comes when a threat you believed was imminent doesn't materialize. Not yet, anyway. Not in this moment. 52 women back still to walls watched this American woman in an army uniform, trying to understand, trying to reconcile what they'd been taught with what they were seeing. The propaganda said Americans were monsters, but this woman had just sent away all the men, had just removed the immediate threat, had just done something none of them expected. Bennett moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible. No sudden movements. She'd treated enough trauma victims to know that panic was contagious. But so was calm. So was safety. If she could project it, maybe they could feel it. She pulled something from her pocket, 6 Hershey bars, her personal ration, saved for emergencies. This qualified. She broke 1 bar, ate a piece herself, proving it wasn't poisoned, proving shared humanity through shared food. Then held out the rest. Not to Keiko. Bennett recognized the woman with her hand in her pocket as the most resistant, the most dangerous. Offering her food first would feel like targeting, like singling out. Instead, Bennett offered the chocolate to the youngest-looking woman. Front row. Couldn't be more than 16 years old. Face still held traces of childhood. Terror mixed with confusion, mixed with something that might have been hope. Michiko Sato. Though Bennett didn't know her name yet. 16 years old. Radio operator trainee. The baby of the group. Still remembered her mother's kindness. Still had nightmares about the films, but hadn't fully internalized them yet. Still had room for doubt about the propaganda. Michi looked at the chocolate, then at Bennett, then back at the chocolate. Her hand trembled as she reached out, took a small piece, brought it to her mouth, tasted real sweetness for the first time in 8 months. Tears streamed down her face as she chewed. Not because it tasted good, though it did, because it was kind, because the American woman had eaten first, because this moment didn't match anything the films had shown her. Michi whispered to the woman beside her, "Honto ni chocolate da," real chocolate. Other women leaned forward, just slightly, just inches, but movement towards something instead of away from it. A shift in the room's energy, microscopic, but present. Bennett noticed, filed it away, kept moving slowly. She looked at Roberto Santos, really looked at him, at his shaking hands, his tear-streaked face, his death grip on that phrasebook. She pulled him aside, far enough that the women couldn't hear, close enough that they could see. Transparency mattered. What happened? Bennett's voice was quiet, no judgment, just question. Roberto's confession came out broken, ashamed. I think I used wrong words. My Japanese, it's not military terminology. I learned from guards who weren't kind. When Sergeant Crawford said measurements for uniforms, I think I said intimate, private measurements for documentation. I think I made it sound like what they feared. Bennett closed her eyes briefly, not in anger, in understanding. PTSD didn't care about good intentions. Trauma spoke its own language, and sometimes that language caused more trauma. Then we fix it, she said. Together. You're not a bad translator, Roberto. You're a traumatized survivor doing your best. Now help me show them what the words should have meant. She turned back to the women, pulled out her trump card, the thing she'd grabbed on her way out of surgery, 3.2 pounds of bureaucratic salvation, the military supply catalog, Women's Division, 1945 edition, 156 pages of proof that sometimes mercy wore the face of efficiency. Bennett was about to teach 52 women that measuring tapes could mean something other than death. She just hoped she had enough time before someone decided there wasn't enough hope. Sarah Bennett had learned something at Anzio that no medical textbook taught, something that came from watching men die and occasionally watching them choose to live. The lesson was simple but profound. Sometimes the best medicine isn't morphine, it's chocolate. And trust. Improving your human first, nurse second. She needed these women to see her as human, not as American, not as enemy, not as the threat from the propaganda films. Just as a woman trying to help other women survive a moment that shouldn't have been dangerous, but had somehow become lethal. Bennett set the catalog on the table. The sound of it hitting the surface was solid, real. The thunk of 3 pounds of bureaucratic paper carried weight beyond its physical mass. It carried the weight of proof, of documentation, of American efficiency turned toward an unexpected purpose. But before she opened it, she needed to understand the full scope of what had gone wrong. She gestured for Roberto to come closer, spoke quietly but not secretly. Let the women see her talking to the translator. Let them witness the attempt at correction rather than hiding it. I need you to tell me exactly what words you used. Every single one. Don't leave anything out because you're embarrassed. I can't fix what I don't understand. Roberto's hands trembled harder. When he said measurements, I said shintai no sunpo, body measurements. But I added kojinteki, private, personal. When he said uniform, I think I implied something invasive. When he measured his chest and waist, I used words like himitsu and kakusareta, secret, hidden. Bennett's face remained neutral. Inside her mind was racing. Every word Roberto listed was another layer of misunderstanding, another brick in a wall of terror built from translation errors and cultural collision and propaganda that had primed these women to interpret every action in the worst possible light. Okay, she said, here is what we're going to do. I'm going to measure myself first, completely, over my uniform. You are going to translate using only medical terminology, like a doctor's chart, clinical, boring, so boring that terror can't survive in how dull it is. Can you do that? Roberto nodded. I can try. I know medical terms. I worked in the camp hospital. I can be clinical. Good, because these women need to see that measuring isn't what they think it is. It's not preparation for assault. It's preparation for dignity. Bennett turned to face the 52 women, made eye contact with as many as she could. Let them see her face. Let them see that she wasn't afraid, wasn't nervous, was simply about to do something routine. She spoke in English first. Let Roberto translate in pieces. Give him time to find the right words. My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm a nurse. I'm going to measure myself for a uniform. The same way every woman in the American military gets measured. There's nothing secret about it, nothing private. It's just numbers that help us order clothes that fit properly. Watch me, then you'll understand. Roberto translated, slowly, carefully, using kengo-fu for nurse, seifuku for uniform, sunpo for measurements without any modifiers. Just measurements, plain, simple, medical. Bennett pulled the measuring tape from her pocket. The tape that had nearly caused 23 suicides. She held it up, let everyone see it clearly. Then she wrapped it around her own chest, over her uniform jacket. Nothing invasive, nothing threatening, just fabric over fabric. Chest, 36 inches. She wrote it on a form, held up the form so they could see. The standard requisition form. Roberto translate that clinically. Mune Mawari, Sanju Roku Inchi. Chest circumference, 36 inches, medical, neutral. The kind of language doctors use during physical examinations. Bennett continued. Wrap the tape around her waist, over her uniform. Waist, 32 inches. Roberto Koshi Mawari, Sanju ni Inchi. Waist circumference, 32 inches, around her hips. Hips, 38 inches. Koshi Mawari, Sanju Hachi Inchi. Hip circumference, 38 inches. She measured her height against a wall chart. Height, 5 feet 7 inches. Shincho, Gofito Nana Inchi. Down her arm from shoulder to wrist. Sleeve length, 24 inches. Sode no Nagasa, Niju Yon Inchi. She took off her shoe, traced her foot on a piece of paper, measured the tracing. Shoe size, 7. Kutsu no Saizu, Nana. The entire process took 4 minutes and 32 seconds. Bennett recorded each measurement on the form, showed the completed form to the room, let them see that it was just numbers in boxes. Nothing sinister, nothing hidden. Just bureaucratic documentation of the sort required to order anything in the military. Boots, helmets, socks, uniforms, everything. Some of the women leaned forward, not much, just inches, but movement toward curiosity instead of away from terror. Bennett caught the shift, filed it away, kept going. Now, she said, I'm going to show you why we need these measurements. She opened the catalog. The catalog had been created in Philadelphia, 1944. A project born from necessity when the Women's Army Corps expanded and someone in the quartermaster department realized that women couldn't just wear smaller versions of men's uniforms. Bodies were different, needs were different, dignity required more than downsizing. A committee of 12 women had designed the sizing system, mostly seamstresses, mostly immigrants, women who understood that clothing was more than fabric. It was dignity made visible. It was the difference between feeling human and feeling like an afterthought. They'd created 1,247 possible size combinations, enough variety that every woman, regardless of shape or size, could find something that fit properly. Not perfectly. Military clothing was never perfect, but properly, with dignity. The catalog was the physical manifestation of that dignity. 156 pages, every page showing technical drawings, every drawing labeled with measurements, every measurement corresponding to actual orderable clothing. Bennett spread the catalog open on the table. Let it take up space. Let it be real and present and undeniable. Pages 1 through 23 showed uniforms, not photographs. Technical drawings, the kind of illustration you'd see in a sewing pattern or an engineering manual. Front view, side view, back view, each view labeled with measurements and size numbers. These are the uniforms, Bennett said. Roberto translated. Size 4 through size 20, 40 different styles, each style available in multiple sizes. Look, she pointed to page 7, a standard duty uniform, khaki cotton, practical. The drawing showed where each measurement mattered. Shoulder width here, sleeve length here, waist here, hem here, everything labeled, everything specific. To order the right uniform, we need exact measurements. Too big and it doesn't fit, too small and it doesn't fit. But exact measurements mean exact fit, which means dignity, which means you can work and move and live without constantly adjusting clothes that don't fit properly. Women were standing now, not all of them, but several, moving closer to see the catalog, curiosity beginning to override programming. The propaganda had never mentioned catalogs, had never shown technical drawings, had never suggested that measuring might lead to something as mundane as properly fitted clothing. Bennett turned to pages 24 through 45. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, letting anticipation build, letting them wonder what came next. Undergarments, brasiers specifically. Page 31 showed technical drawings of brasiers, type A-4, cotton and adjustable straps, support structure clearly diagrammed, side view showing how the garment was constructed, front view showing how it should fit, multiple sizes listed, 30A through 44D. The specificity was overwhelming, not invasive, not sexual, just specific, medical, the kind of technical precision that made it clear this wasn't about exploitation. This was about engineering, about solving the problem of how to provide proper support for women with different body types doing military work. Keiko stepped forward. First time she'd moved since the crisis began. Her hand was out of her pocket now, the razor blade forgotten for the moment. She stared at page 31 like it was written in a language she'd forgotten she could read. Korewa, she whispered. Igakusho mitai. This is like a medical textbook. She was right. The drawings were medical, clinical, the kind of illustration you'd see in nursing school, showing anatomy, showing structure, showing function without any implication of anything beyond function. Bennett caught the whisper, understood enough from tone and body language. Yes, she said, medical, professional, just like the charts we use for patient care. Nothing secret, nothing hidden, Just information to make sure everything works correctly. Roberto translated, and this time his translation was perfect, because medical language was what he knew, what his trauma hadn't corrupted. In the hospital at Camp O'Donnell, surrounded by dying men, medical terms had been neutral. Safe, the only words that meant what they said. Yuki Nakamura stepped forward. 22 years old, former nurse like Keiko. She'd worked in a field hospital near Manila before capture. She recognized medical documentation when she saw it. She pointed to the diagram, then to herself, then made a questioning gesture. For us, Roberto translated her question. Bennett nodded. For you, all of you, every single woman in this room gets measured, gets properly fitted undergarments, gets uniforms that actually fit, gets shoes that don't slide off or cause blisters, gets clothing that lets you feel human again. She turned more pages. Shoes, page 46 through 67, dozens of styles, sizes 4 through 11. Width options narrow, regular, wide. Each size carefully calibrated. Each width designed for different foot shapes. The kind of attention to detail that suggested someone had actually thought about this, had actually considered that women deserve shoes that fit correctly. Socks, 14 different sizes, belts with 23 hole positions to accommodate different waist sizes. Caps in 8 different circumferences. Everything itemized, everything specific, everything suggesting that the U.S. military had spent considerable time and money ensuring that women could be properly equipped. Then Bennett showed them something that changed the entire emotional trajectory of the room. The price list. Bottom of each page. Small print, but visible. Everything in the catalog had a price listed in $1945. Complete uniform, $12. Undergarments set of $7, $8. Shoes, 2 pairs, $10. Socks, 14 pairs, $3. Accessories, $12. Bennett pulled out a requisition form, her own, from 1942 when she joined the Army Nurse Corps. Luan, she said, this is my requisition form from 3 years ago, the same form from 1942, identical process. She held up both forms side by side, hers from 1942, the blank one for the women from 1940, identical. Not similar, identical. I'm not special, Bennett continued. This isn't a special process for prisoners. This is standard for every American servicewoman. You're being processed exactly like I was, exactly like every WWII, every nurse, every woman who serves. Because that's what the regulations say. Treat prisoners of war humanely, which includes properly fitted clothing. The words hung in the air. Humanely, properly fitted. Standard process. Everything the propaganda had told them was wrong. Not just wrong, inverted. The measuring wasn't preparation for humiliation. It was preparation for dignity. The documentation wasn't evidence for war crimes. It was bureaucracy ensuring proper supply chain management. The entire framework of their terror was built on a foundation of lies. In that catalog, 3 pounds of bureaucratic paper with technical drawings and price lists and form numbers was proof. One woman in the back started laughing. Not happy laughing, hysterical laughing. The kind of laughter that comes when you realize you've been preparing to die for something that was never going to kill you. When you realize that terror was the weapon, not the tape measure. The laughter spread. Some women were crying, some were laughing, some were doing both simultaneously. The emotional release was physical. Years of fear draining out through tears and inappropriate laughter and the shaking that comes after adrenaline fades. Bennett let it happen, didn't try to calm them or quiet them or restore order. This was order. This was 52 women realizing they might survive this day. She turned to page 31 again. The brassiers. Held the catalog up so everyone could see clearly. You haven't worn proper undergarments in how long? She asked. Didn't wait for answer. I'm guessing years. I'm guessing you've been wrapping yourself in torn cloth and using rope as makeshift support and dealing with constant chafing and discomfort. Yes. Several women nodded. Every woman in this room will receive 7 brassiers, properly fitted, in your actual size, plus 14 pairs of underwear, plus uniforms that actually fit your body instead of hanging off you like tents, plus shoes in your correct size and width, plus socks that don't fall down, plus everything you need to feel human again. She paused. Let that sink in. That's not punishment. That's not preparation for anything terrible. That's just America being America. Bureaucratic, excessive, weirdly specific about sizing, and generous in ways that probably don't make tactical sense but make human sense. The catalog stayed open on the table. Women crowded around now, pointing at different pages, asking questions. Roberto translating. His confidence growing as he realized his vocabulary was adequate for technical discussions. Medical terms, clothing terms, numbers and sizes and specifications. The razor blade Keiko had been holding fell from her pocket, hit the concrete floor with a tiny metallic sound. She looked down at it, looked back at the catalog, then started crying. Not hysterical crying, quiet crying. The kind of crying that comes from shame mixed with relief, mixed with the overwhelming weight of realizing you almost died for a misunderstanding. Bennett knelt down, picked up the razor blade, held it in her palm. You're safe now, she said quietly. Direct eye contact. Whatever you thought was going to happen, it's not happening. You're going to get measured for clothes, that's all. Just clothes. Keiko nodded, couldn't speak. Could only nod and cry and try to process the fact that the last 3 years of fear had been based on lies. Bennett stood, addressed the whole room. I need volunteers, someone willing to go first, to show everyone else that this is exactly what I said it is. Boring, medical, a process that takes 4 minutes and results in properly fitted clothes. Silence. 52 women looking at each other. Years of programming didn't disappear in 15 minutes of catalog browsing. Fear was still present, just competing with curiosity and desperate hope now. Then the youngest spoke. Michiko Sato, 16 years old. Radio operator trainee. The girl who'd accepted chocolate first. She stepped forward. Watashi wa, she said. Her voice shook but held. I will be first. The decision was instinctive, not brave exactly, just young enough that programming hadn't fully set, old enough to remember her mother measuring her for school uniforms, young enough to believe that maybe possibly American nurses might be like her mother, careful, kind, precise in ways that felt like care. Why, Yuki asked her, genuine question. Why volunteer? Michi's answer was simple, profound in its simplicity. If they wanted to hurt us, why give chocolate first? Why send the men away? Why show us catalog? Why? Explain everything. She looked at Bennett. I think she tells truth. The logic was unassailable. The propaganda had never suggested Americans would be kind before being cruel, had never mentioned chocolate or catalogs or female nurses who measured themselves first as demonstration. The script had been violated, which meant maybe the script was wrong. Michi sat in the chair, looked up at Bennett, nodded. Bennett pulled out the measuring tape, that yellow fabric, those black numbers, the thing that had nearly caused 23 suicides 15 minutes ago, now just a tool. Context had transformed it from weapon back to implement. She measured carefully, methodically, exactly as she'd measured herself. Height, 4 feet 11 inches. Wrote it down, showed Michi the form before recording. Chest, 30 inches. Overclothes, no invasiveness, just tape over fabric. Waist, 24 inches. Hips, 33 inches. Inseam, 28 inches. Each measurement was called out, translated by Roberto using proper medical terminology, recorded on the form, shown to Michi for confirmation. The transparency was absolute. Nothing hidden, nothing secret, just documentation. The entire process took 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When Bennett finished, she showed Michi the completed form. This gets sent to the supply depot in Manila. Within 3 days, you'll receive clothes in these exact sizes. Everything on that catalog that corresponds to these numbers. Understand? Michi nodded, returned to the group. Whispered to the woman next to her. Honto ni tada yo fuku dake deshita. Really was just clothing. The second woman stepped forward. Yuki Nakamura, 22, former nurse, Keiko's friend. If Michi could do it, she could do it. If the process was really just measuring, she could survive measuring. Bennett repeated the process. Same careful methodology, same transparency, same boring clinical precision. By the time she measured the fifth woman, it had become routine, almost dull. The tension had drained from the room like water through a sieve. What remained was exhaustion and cautious optimism, and the beginning of something that might eventually become trust. Women started talking among themselves, comparing measurements, discussing sizes, some laughing about how much weight they'd lost, others hopeful about the prospect of clothes that actually fit. The 23rd woman to volunteer was Keiko. She sat in the chair, looked at Bennett. "I almost killed myself," she said in halting English, words she'd been practicing internally. "I almost died because measuring tape." Bennett met her eyes. "But you didn't. You're here. You're alive. And in 4 minutes, you're going to have numbers on a form that will turn into dignity. That's what matters now." She began measuring. Height, 5 feet 3 inches. Chest, 30 inches. Waist, 22 inches. Bennett paused at that number, 22 inches. Dangerously thin. Starvation thin. The kind of measurement that suggested malnutrition severe enough to cause permanent damage if not corrected soon. "You're very thin," Bennett said gently. "We'll make sure you get extra rations. Build your strength back up." But Keiko wasn't hearing the words about rations. She was remembering. Osaka, her mother's sewing room, standing in her slip while her mother measured her for a school uniform. The tape soft against her skin, her mother's hands gentle and practiced. 24 inches, her mother had said. Perfect for a growing girl, Keiko-chan. 7 years ago, 24 inches, now 22. 2 inches lost to war and fear and starvation. 2 inches that represented everything she'd sacrificed, everything the war had taken from her. When Bennett wrapped the tape around her waist, Keiko remembered the feeling of being measured with love, by someone who wanted her to have things that fit properly, who cared enough to be precise. And she cried. Not from fear this time, from the overwhelming kindness of being measured with care, from the memory of her mother, from the realization that measuring tapes had always meant dignity. The propaganda had inverted it, had made something loving into something terrifying, had weaponized the language of care. But here in this room with this American nurse who'd measured herself first and shown them catalogs and explained everything, the measuring tape was returning to its original purpose, making things fit, providing dignity, proving that someone cared enough to be precise. Bennett finished, showed Keiko the form. 22 inches. We'll order size 6. It should fit well once you've had a few good meals. Keiko nodded, couldn't speak, could only nod and cry and try to hold on to this feeling. This moment when terror transformed into something else, something that might eventually become healing. The measuring continued, woman after woman, each one taking approximately 4 minutes, each one recorded precisely, each one processed with the same careful dignity Bennett had shown from the beginning. By 6:45 p.m., all 52 forms were complete, stacked neatly, each one representing a woman who'd walked into this room expecting death and was walking out expecting clothes. Bennett spoke to the supply sergeant who'd been waiting outside. Rush order, Manila Depot, 48-hour turnaround. These women need dignity now, not next week. Ma'am, we don't usually rush orders for prisoners. Bennett's voice went cold, professional cold, officer cold. Sergeant, these women nearly committed suicide because of a translation error. They've been wearing men's uniforms 3 sizes too large for months. They deserve properly fitted clothes immediately. I'll sign off on the priority status. Make it happen. Yes, ma'am. The forms were collected, packaged, sent to Manila on the evening supply truck. 52 women were escorted to temporary barracks. Clean facilities. Real beds with mattresses instead of bare floors. The luxury of it was overwhelming. The normalcy was disorienting. They'd been prepared for torture. Instead, they got catalogs and measurements and the promise of clothes that fit. The cognitive dissonance was immense. Years of propaganda couldn't be erased in one afternoon. But doubt had been planted. Questions had been raised. The possibility that they'd been lied to was now undeniable. As they settled into the barracks, one question dominated every conversation. What if the clothes actually arrive? What if the Americans actually keep their promise? What if everything they'd been taught was wrong? 3 days would answer those questions. 3 days of waiting and wondering, and trying to reconcile what they'd believed with what they'd experienced. 3 days until 2 trucks arrived from Manila carrying 52 brown packages. 3 days until measuring tapes transformed from weapons of psychological warfare into tools of unexpected mercy. But that was 3 days away. Tonight, 52 women went to sleep in real beds, no longer holding razor blades, cautiously allowing themselves to hope that tomorrow might not be the day they died. And in her office, Sarah Bennett wrote a note in her diary. September 13th, 1945. Today I measured 52 women for clothing. Bill thinks I'll get court-martialed for rushing the orders and breaking protocol. Maybe I will. But I'd do it again. They thought we would torture them. We gave them catalogs and promises instead. Some rules matter less than mercy. She closed the diary, went to sleep, dreamed of measuring tapes and Anzio and all the ways that kindness could surprise people who'd been taught to expect cruelty. Tomorrow she'd add handkerchiefs to the orders. Small embroidered handkerchiefs with tiny blue flowers. Not regulation, not authorized, but necessary. Because sometimes mercy required breaking rules. And sometimes the most powerful thing America could offer wasn't weapons or rhetoric or propaganda. Sometimes it was just clothes that fit properly, and flowers embroidered on fabric, and the radical act of treating enemies like humans who deserve dignity. 3 days felt like 3 years. September 14th, 1945. Morning. The women woke in clean barracks to a breakfast that made no sense. Scrambled eggs, toast with real butter, bacon. The kind of breakfast that seemed designed to confuse rather than nourish. Keiko stared at the bacon on her plate, thick cut, crispy at the edges, glistening with fat. She hadn't seen meat like this in 2 years. The Japanese military had fed them rice, thin soup, occasionally fish, never bacon, never this much fat and salt in abundance. She picked up a piece, bit into it. The texture was everything the propaganda had never mentioned. Crispy exterior giving way to tender meat, salt exploding across her tongue, fat coating her mouth in a way that felt obscene and necessary simultaneously. The flavor was aggressive, unapologetic, American in a way she couldn't fully articulate. This wasn't survival food. This was enjoyment food. Food meant to taste good, not just sustain life. Other women were crying as they ate, not from sadness, from the overwhelming sensation of abundance, from the cognitive dissonance of being prisoners eating better than they'd eaten as soldiers in their own army. Why, Michi asked between bites, why feed us this well? No one had an answer. The propaganda had never addressed this scenario, had never suggested Americans might feed prisoners of war bacon for breakfast. The script was wrong, which meant everything connected to the script might also be wrong. September 14th passed slowly. Afternoon brought another meal. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The chicken skin crackled when Keiko bit into it. Grease ran down her chin. The flavor, salty and peppery and rich, was almost violent in its intensity. She'd forgotten what it felt like to taste food with this much fat, this much flavor, this much evidence of resources spent on feeding people who were supposed to be enemies. Some women couldn't finish their portions. Stomachs unused to rich food rebelled. But they tried, kept trying, because the food was proof of something. They weren't sure what yet, but proof of something. Night came. Women lay in real beds with real mattresses. Some cried, some prayed, some touched their waists, their chests, the places where measuring tapes had touched them 3 days ago. Remembering the terror, comparing it to the present reality of full stomachs and clean sheets. Keiko lay awake, fingers tracing her ribs under the thin sleeping shirt. 22 inches, 2 inches gone to war. Would clothes really arrive? Or was this elaborate cruelty? Feed them well, promise them dignity, then reveal it was all designed to make the final humiliation more devastating. She wanted to believe, desperately wanted to believe, but belief was dangerous. Hope was a vulnerability. Better to expect nothing, better to be prepared for disappointment. Her hand found the razor blade under her pillow. She'd kept it, just in case, just as insurance against the possibility that kindness was camouflage for something worse. September 15th brought more meals, more abundance, more cognitive dissonance, and growing anxiety. One more day until the promised delivery. One more day until they'd know if the measuring had meant what Bennett said it meant. Some women started making plans. If the clothes arrive, what does that mean? If Americans keep promises about clothes, what else might be true? What other propaganda might be lies? Yuki and Keiko talked late into the night. My brother told me Americans were devils, Yuki said. Showed me photographs of burned cities. Said this is what devils do. We burn cities too, Keiko replied quietly. In China, in the Philippines, we did the same things, but we called it necessary, called it defense, called it anything but what it was. The conversation was dangerous, disloyal, treasonous if overheard by the wrong people. But the wrong people were gone, defeated. And in their absence, truth had room to breathe. September 16th dawned humid and bright, morning breakfast, afternoon approaching. The promised 48 hours was now 72 hours, close enough to the deadline that hope was becoming painful. At 9:37 a.m., someone heard engines, trucks, multiple trucks, getting closer. Women rushed to windows, pressed against glass, watched as two U.S. Army trucks pulled up to the barracks. Big trucks, cargo trucks, backs loaded with boxes, brown cardboard boxes, stacked carefully, each box approximately 2 feet square, heavy enough that soldiers needed 2 hands to carry them. The boxes were labeled, black stenciled letters, QM Depot Manila, women's clothing, rush order. 52 women held their breath simultaneously. Lieutenant Bennett, now Captain Bennett, due to a field promotion that had come through overnight, supervised the unloading personally. She counted boxes as they came off the trucks, checking them against a manifest, making sure every package was accounted for. 52 packages, she announced, all present, all accounted for. She looked up at the windows where 52 faces watched, smiled. Not a triumphant smile, just a satisfied smile. The smile of someone who'd made a promise and kept it. Your clothes are here, she called up. Everything we promised. Everything you deserve. The distribution happened in the main barracks room. Boxes lined up on tables, each box labeled with a name in English and Japanese. Roberto's edition. His way of apologizing for the mistranslation that had nearly ended in tragedy. Keiko Tanaka, Tianzhong Huizi. She stared at her name on the box, her name in 2 languages, her name suggesting she was a person worthy of having packages addressed to her specifically. Not just prisoner number something, not just anonymous enemy, a person with a name. Her hands shook as she approached the table. Captain Bennett handed her the package. Everything in your sizes, as promised. Keiko carried the box to her bunk, set it down, stared at it. Other women were already opening theirs. Exclamations, crying, laughter, the sounds of discovery and disbelief and joy mixing together. She peeled back the brown paper. Slowly, as if moving too fast might make it disappear. Inside, folded neatly, precisely, professionally packed, 2 uniforms, khaki cotton, tropical weight. She unfolded one, held it up. The fit looked right, size 6, cut for a woman's body, not a man's uniform that happened to be small, a woman's uniform designed for a woman's shape. She set it aside, kept unpacking. 7 brassieres, white cotton, size 30B, adjustable straps. She picked one up. The construction was solid, professional, the kind of garment designed to last and function and provide actual support. Not a makeshift cloth wrapping, not rope, actual proper undergarments. 7 pairs underwear, white cotton, size small, 2 pairs shoes, brown leather, size 5.5 narrow. She slipped off the oversized military boots she'd been wearing. Tried on the shoes. They fit, actually fit. Her foot didn't slide, didn't need newspaper stuffing. Just fit correctly. The sensation was so unexpected she gasped. 14 pairs socks, cotton, women's sizes 5 through 7. The specificity was almost comical. 14 pairs. Who authorized 14 pairs of socks for prisoners of war, Americans apparently? Americans with their excessive bureaucracy and their weird commitment to ensuring everyone had properly fitted everything. And at the bottom of the box, something unexpected. A dress, light blue cotton, small white buttons down the front. Simple construction, but clearly well made. She lifted it out. unfolded it completely. The color was striking. Not military khaki or olive drab. Blue. Civilian blue. The color of sky and water and things that existed outside military contexts. She held it against her body. The length looked right. The waist would fit. The shoulders appropriate for her frame. Size 6, cut precisely for her measurements. And tucked into the pocket of the dress, 3 small pieces of fabric. Handkerchiefs. White cotton, hemmed neatly, and in one corner of each, tiny embroidered flowers, blue flowers, delicate, precise. Someone had spent time adding these flowers, had spent effort making these handkerchiefs something more than functional. Keiko's legs gave out. She sat on her bunk holding the handkerchiefs, staring at the tiny embroidered flowers. This wasn't regulation. This wasn't required. This was extra. This was someone deciding that prisoners of war deserved flowers embroidered on fabric, deserved tiny unnecessary beauty. The tears came hard and fast, not delicate crying, ugly crying, the kind of crying that comes from 2 years of accumulated grief and terror and confusion releasing all at once. Around her, similar scenes played out. 52 women unpacking 52 boxes, discovering that America had kept its promises, that measuring tapes had meant exactly what Captain Bennett said they meant. That dignity was possible even in defeat. Michi sat on her bunk wearing her new brassiere over her sleeping shirt, crying and laughing simultaneously. "GU," she kept saying. Freedom, not political freedom, the freedom of proper support, the freedom of clothing that fit, the freedom of not having to constantly adjust makeshift garments. Yuki stood in front of a small mirror wearing her new uniform, turning slowly, seeing herself properly dressed for the first time in years. The uniform fit, actually fit. She looked like a professional woman, not a prisoner, not a broken soldier, a woman in a properly fitted uniform. Captain Bennett moved through the room, not supervising, just present, available if anyone needed help with sizing or had questions or wanted to express gratitude. Keiko approached her, still holding the handkerchiefs. "These," she said in halting English, "not regulation. You add these." Bennett smiled, slightly guilty. "No, not regulation. I paid for those myself, 15 cents each. Got in trouble for it, actually. Unauthorized comfort items for prisoners of war, against protocol." Why Keiko needed to understand. Why break rules for flowers on cloth? Bennett's answer was simple. Because you deserved them. Because measuring tapes had already taken enough from you. Because sometimes rules matter less than mercy. Because flowers are important. The conversation was halting. English and Japanese mixing. Roberto translating pieces when needed. But the meaning transcended language. The handkerchiefs were proof of something propaganda couldn't explain. Individual kindness from an enemy who saw prisoners as humans deserving unnecessary beauty. That evening, 52 women ate dinner, wearing properly fitted clothes. The transformation was visible. Physical. They sat straighter, moved more confidently. The constant adjustment of ill-fitting garments had stopped. They could focus on other things, could think about futures instead of constantly managing present discomfort. Keiko put on the blue dress, looked at herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly. Waist at 22 inches, chest at 30, length appropriate for someone 5 feet 3 inches tall. The blue color made her skin look less sallow, less sick. The white buttons down the front were simple but elegant. She looked human again. Not a prisoner, not a defeated soldier, just a woman in a blue dress that fit properly. The memory of her mother came flooding back. 1938, Osaka, her mother's sewing room, being measured for school uniforms with love and precision. 24 inches, perfect for a growing girl. Now 7 years later in a barracks in Manila, wearing a dress made by Americans who'd never met her but had measured her with similar precision. 22 inches, 2 inches lost to war. But the dress fit anyway, because someone had cared enough to be exact. She understood something profound in that moment. Her mother had measured her with love. Captain Bennett had measured her with professional compassion. But both women had used measuring tapes to provide dignity, to ensure proper fit, to prove that she mattered enough to deserve clothes that fit correctly. The measuring tape had always been a tool of dignity. The Japanese propaganda machine had inverted it, had weaponized language and images to make women fear the very thing designed to help them. But truth was resilient. And in this moment, wearing this dress, Keiko felt truth settling into her bones. America wasn't perfect. Americans had done terrible things in this war. But they'd also done this: fed prisoners bacon, given them properly fitted clothes, added embroidered flowers to handkerchiefs, treated defeated enemies with more dignity than the Japanese military had treated its own soldiers. The propaganda had been wrong, not partially wrong, fundamentally wrong. September 1946. Keiko and the other women were repatriated to Japan. The journey home was long, complicated, processed through multiple stations, given minimal supplies for the journey. But Keiko kept three things from Manila. Three things she wouldn't surrender or leave behind or trade for anything: the blue dress, the embroidered handkerchief, and Form QM424 with her measurements recorded in Captain Bennett's handwriting. Height 5 feet 3 inches, chest 30 inches, waist 22 inches. Evidence. Proof. Testimony that mercy had existed when propaganda said it couldn't. Most women burned everything from the war: uniforms, equipment, photographs, anything that reminded them of defeat and shame and the years they'd lost. Burning was cleansing, forgetting was survival. But Keiko kept the dress, folded it carefully, wrapped it in cloth, stored it in a cedar chest in her bedroom. Shoko, she told her mother when asked why she kept an American dress. Evidence. Her mother didn't understand, didn't press. Let her daughter keep her secrets and her evidence and her private relationship with a blue dress that meant something only she fully understood. 1952. Keiko returned to civilian nursing. Osaka City Hospital, the same hospital where she'd worked before the war. Some things had changed. Much had been destroyed and rebuilt. But the work was familiar, comforting. Healing others helped heal herself. 1953. She married Hiroshi Tanaka, an accountant, a gentleman who'd lost his first wife to the fire bombings. They were two broken people finding wholeness together. Not passionate love, practical love, the kind built on shared trauma and mutual respect and the quiet decision to build something new from ruins. 1954, their daughter was born, Yuki Tanaka, named after Keiko's friend from the war. Yuki Nakamura, who'd been measured right after Michi, who'd helped Keiko survive those 3 days of waiting, who died in 1951 from complications of malnutrition that had never fully resolved. Baby Yuki was healthy, strong, born into a Japan at peace, growing up never knowing hunger or air raids or the terror of measuring tapes. Keiko never spoke about the war. Not to Hiroshi, not to neighbors, not to anyone. The shame of defeat was still fresh, the trauma still raw. Better to be silent, better to focus on the future and let the past remain buried. But she kept the dress. April 1967. Yuki was 11 years old, curious, intelligent, the kind of child who asked uncomfortable questions. She found the dress while looking for blankets in the cedar chest, pulled it out. Light blue cotton, now faded slightly but still intact. Small white buttons, simple construction. "Okasan," she called. "Why do you keep an old American dress?" Keiko froze. Hadn't expected this conversation. Hadn't prepared for it. The dress had been private, hidden. A secret relationship between her and memories no one else could access. But Yuki was waiting, holding the dress, genuinely curious. Keiko sat down, gestured for Yuki to sit beside her, and for the first time in 22 years, she told the story. Not all of it, not the worst parts, but the essential truth. The measuring tape terror. The propaganda films. Captain Bennett's intervention. The catalog. The measurements. The 3-day wait. The boxes arriving. The handkerchiefs with embroidered flowers. The Americans gave you this dress, Yuki was struggling to understand. But teacher says Americans were cruel, that they dropped fire on our cities. They did, Keiko confirmed. Americans did terrible things in the war, but they also did this. Measured me carefully, ordered clothes that fit, added flowers to handkerchiefs, treated me like a human who deserved dignity. But why? Because that's what America is. Keiko tried to explain something she was still processing herself. contradictions, capable of terrible violence and unexpected kindness, sometimes simultaneously. I don't understand it completely. But I keep this dress as evidence that mercy existed when I'd been taught it couldn't. Yuki touched the fabric. It's soft. It is, and it fit perfectly. 22 inches at the waist. That's how thin I was. Starving. But they measured me precisely and ordered clothes that fit anyway. That's what I want you to remember. Not the hate, the precision, the care, the flowers. The conversation ended. Yuki returned the dress to the cedar chest. But something had shifted. A story had been passed from mother to daughter. Evidence preserved for another generation. September 1995. The U.S. military declassified World War II documents. Boxes and boxes of files. Reports and photographs and bureaucratic records that had been sealed for 50 years. Keiko was 74 years old, retired, a grandmother now. She heard about the declassification on the news, wondered if her story might be documented somewhere, wondered if Captain Bennett's report existed in those archives. She went to the library, asked for help accessing the newly released documents. A librarian young and efficient helped her navigate the digital database. Processing Protocol Report. Manila Station, September 1945. 47 pages, single-spaced, bureaucratic language. But there, real, documented. The full list of 52 names, hers among them. Keiko Tanaka, age 24, former Imperial Japanese Army nurse. Processed September 13, 1945. Captain Sarah Bennett's report. Intervention required to prevent mass suicide attempt. 23 women prepared to kill themselves due to mistranslation of standard uniform requisition procedure. Recommended actions: immediate removal of male personnel, demonstration of measurement protocol, provision of evidence regarding actual purpose of measurements. Results: successful de-escalation. All 52 women measured and processed without incident. Sergeant William Crawford's addendum. Captain Bennett violated multiple protocols, including unauthorized priority rush orders and requisition of non-standard comfort items, specifically embroidered handkerchiefs, at personal expense of $7.80. However, her actions directly prevented loss of life. Recommend commendation rather than reprimand. Roberto Santos's apology letter, never sent, found in his papers after his death. To the 52 women I nearly killed with wrong words. I have spent 34 years trying to forgive myself. I cannot. My Japanese was prison Japanese, brutal Japanese. When Sergeant Crawford asked for measurements for uniforms, my trauma translated it as threat. I am sorry. I am so sorry. If you survived, please know it was despite me, not because of me. Commendation for Captain Bennett, Bronze Star. For exceptional judgment under crisis conditions. Captain Bennett's quick thinking and cultural sensitivity prevented multiple casualties and established protocols for all future female POW processing. Reprimand for Captain Bennett. Unauthorized requisition of comfort items, fine of $7.80 to be deducted from pay. Both documents dated the same day, commended and reprimanded simultaneously. Very American, very bureaucratic, very perfectly contradictory. And photographs, black and white, grainy, but clear enough. 52 women in new clothes. September 16, 1945. Standing in rows, some smiling, most looking shell-shocked, and all wearing properly fitted uniforms. And in the center of the front row, a young woman in a light blue dress. Keiko stared at her 24-year-old face, saw the trauma still visible in her eyes, but also saw something else. Hope. Cautious, fragile hope. The kind that comes from discovering propaganda might be wrong. She requested a copy of the photograph. The librarian printed it for her. She took it home, showed it to her daughter, her granddaughter. Evidence made visible. Proof that the story wasn't just memory, was documented, real, true. November 1990, a letter arrived from America, postmarked Des Moines, Iowa, from someone named William Crawford. Keiko's hand shook as she opened it. The letter was in English. Her granddaughter Emmy translated. Dear Mrs. Tanaka, my name is Bill Crawford. I was the quartermaster sergeant who held the measuring tape on September 13, 1945. I just read the declassified files. I learned your name for the first time 50 years later. I've thought about you 52 women every day since 1945. I wanted you to know. Captain Sarah Bennett Crawford is 83 now. Her health is failing, but her mind remains sharp. She married me in 1947. We have 3 children. She has kept that catalog on her desk for 50 years and still looks at it some mornings. When I showed her your name in the declassified files, she cried. She had always wondered if you survived. She wanted me to tell you the handkerchiefs were worth every penny. I hope you are well. I hope you kept the dress. Bill Crawford. Keiko read the translation 3 times. Captain Bennett had married Sergeant Crawford. The man with the measuring tape had married the woman who'd saved them. They'd built a life together, had children, kept the photograph. Captain Bennett was still alive, 83 years old, failing health, but alive. Keiko could write to her directly, could tell her that the blue dress had been kept for 50 years, that the handkerchief was still folded carefully in a drawer, that the memory of her kindness had sustained Keiko through decades of rebuilding. But she could write to Crawford, could tell him, could close a circle that had been open for half a century. She asked Emmy to help compose a response, in English, carefully worded. Dear Mr. Crawford, thank you for your letter. Yes, I kept the dress. I have kept it for 50 years. I keep it as evidence that mercy is real. Your wife saved my life and the lives of 22 other women. I almost used a razor blade on September 13, 1945. I was ready to die. She stopped me, not with force, with chocolate and catalogs and patience. Please tell your children their mother was a hero, not because she fought, because she measured carefully, because she added flowers to handkerchiefs, because she saw enemies as humans. I am 74 years old now. I have a daughter and a granddaughter. They know the story. They have seen the dress. The evidence continues. Thank you for everything. Keiko Tanaka. 2 letters crossing the Pacific. 2 elderly people connected by a measuring tape and a blue dress in a moment 50 years ago when kindness had prevented tragedy. October 2005. Emmy was 18, an exchange student at the University of Michigan, studying history, specifically women in World War II. For a research project, she searched for her grandmother's name in military records, found the photograph, found Captain Bennett's report, found everything, and found something else. Captain Sarah Bennett Crawford had died in March 2003, 8 years after her letter to Keiko, but her daughter was still alive. Margaret Crawford, age 56, living in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Emmy sent an email, subject line, "My grandmother was one of the 52 women your mother saved." Margaret's response came 37 minutes later. "My mother died 2 years ago, but before she died, she told me to watch for this email. She said someday someone from those 52 women would find me." She was right. She kept everything. The catalog, the diary, the photo, and a letter from someone named Keiko Tanaka. "Can we meet? I have things to show you. Things she left for you." December 2005, Tokyo, a small cafe in Shibuya. 4 women sat at a corner table. Keiko, 84 years old, moving slowly but present, sharp, determined to complete this circle before she died. Yuki, 49, her daughter, present for support in translation and witnessing. Emmy, 18, the granddaughter who'd made this meeting possible, the generation that would carry the story forward. Margaret Crawford, 56, carrying a heavy bag, nervous, emotional, about to meet women her mother had saved 60 years ago. The language barrier was immediate and obvious. Margaret spoke no Japanese. Keiko's English was limited. Emmy translated, but some things didn't need translation. Keiko brought 3 items, carefully wrapped, precious. The blue dress, 60 years old, faded but intact, still showing signs of precise construction, still fitting the measurements recorded in 1945. The embroidered handkerchief, white cotton, tiny blue flowers still visible, never washed, too precious to risk damaging. Form QM424, yellowed paper, but legible. Height 5 feet 3 inches, chest 30 inches, waist 22 inches. In Captain Bennett's handwriting, Margaret brought her own items, the catalog, her mother's personal copy, saved for 60 years, pages yellowed and brittle, but complete, all 156 pages, with notes in the margins. Ordered 52 sets September 13th, 1945, delivered September 16th, all sizes correct. The photograph, the original. September 16th, 1945, 52 women in new clothes, Keiko in her blue dress in the center front row, and Captain Bennett's diary, a small leather-bound book. September 16th, 1945, entry marked. Margaret read it aloud. Emmy translated into Japanese for Keiko. Today, I measured 52 women for clothing. Bill thinks I'll get court-martialed for the handkerchiefs. Maybe I will, but I'd do it again. They thought we would torture them. We gave them buttons and flowers instead. Some rules matter less than mercy. If that's insubordination, then I'm guilty as charged. The tears started before Emmy finished translating. 4 women, 3 generations, 2 countries, 1 table, all crying. Keiko held the handkerchief, the real one, the one she'd kept. Margaret held the catalog, the one her mother had saved. Both women understanding something that transcended language or nationality or the decades separating that moment from this one. Mercy was real, documented, preserved, passed down through generations as evidence against cynicism and despair and the propaganda that said kindness couldn't exist between enemies. The cafe owner, a Japanese-American man in his 50s, brought out something unexpected. Apple pie. On the house, he said, for the greatest generation. Keiko tasted American apple pie for the first time. Sweet cinnamon, tart apples, buttery crust, flavors she'd never experienced. American sweetness preserved for 60 years, just like the dress. Oishi, she said. Delicious, not just the pie, the moment. The completion of a circle that had begun with terror and ended with 4 women eating pie together. Evidence that measuring tapes could build bridges, that flowers mattered, that mercy echoed through generations. Before they parted, Keiko made an announcement, through Emmy's translation, clear and firm. When I die, the dress goes to the Smithsonian, so people remember. Mercy spoke every language. Americans were not perfect, but they were capable of this, of measuring carefully, of adding flowers, of treating enemies like humans who deserve dignity. That matters. That's worth remembering. Margaret nodded, and I'll donate Mom's catalog, and the diary, and the photo together. American mercy and Japanese memory, together. They shook hands, hugged awkwardly across cultural boundaries and language barriers, made promises to stay in touch, knowing that time was limited, that this might be the only time they met in person, but that the connection was real, documented, permanent. March 2015. Keiko Tanaka died peacefully in her sleep, aged 94, surrounded by family. Her last words, according to Yuki, were about the blue dress. Wasuranai Day. Don't forget. 6 months later, the Smithsonian National Museum of American History opened a new exhibit. Mercy and Measurement, the 52 Women of Manila. The blue dress in a climate-controlled case. Form QM424 beside Imamdin. The embroidered handkerchief displayed carefully. Captain Bennett's catalog. Her diary. The photograph from September 16, 1945. Roberto Santos's unsent apology letter. Crawford's 1995 letter to Keiko. The measuring tape itself, yellow fabric with black numbers, donated by the Crawford family. Everything preserved, everything documented, everything available for future generations to see and understand and learn from. The museum placard read, on September 13, 1945, 52 Japanese women prisoners of war believed they would die. Imperial propaganda had taught them that Americans would torture and humiliate them. A mistranslation made them certain. Instead, they received measuring tapes and catalogs, improperly fitted clothes, and small handkerchiefs embroidered with flowers. This blue dress size 6 belonged to Keiko Tanaka. She kept it for 70 years, not as a memory of war, but as evidence that mercy can speak any language. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with weapons. They're won with kindness. Below the main display, a timeline showed the impact. 89 female Japanese POWs captured entire Philippines campaign. 52 processed at Manila Station, September 13, 1945. 23 prepared to commit suicide before intervention. 0 suicides after Captain Bennett's intervention. 1 measuring tape. 1 catalog, 156 pages. 52 dresses distributed. $45 allocated per PO. $7.80 Captain Bennett paid from personal funds for handkerchiefs. 60 years Keiko Tanaka preserved the blue dress. Infinite lessons about humanity. 2020, a school group visited the exhibit. 8th graders on a field trip. Bored initially, checking phones, wanting to be anywhere else. But one girl stopped in front of the blue dress, read the placard, stared at the photograph of young Keiko wearing that exact dress 60 years earlier. Her teacher noticed, came over. "What's interesting about this one, Hannah?" The girl, coincidentally named after flowers, thought for a moment. "My great-great-grandmother was Japanese. She never talked about the war. Grandma said she kept something American in a cedar chest. I wonder if it was like this. I wonder if someone measured her carefully too." "Maybe," the teacher said. "That's what this exhibit is about. The people we don't usually hear about. The small kindnesses that don't make it into history books. The measuring tapes that became mercy." Hannah took a photo of the display, posted it to social media, caption, "My great-great-grandmother's generation. They survived by being measured with care, not cruelty, important difference." The post got 47 likes, 3 shares, 2 comments, small numbers. But the story continued. Evidence preserved. Mercy documented. Truth passed forward. And in a glass case in Washington, D.C., a light blue dress hung peacefully. Size 6, cut for measurements taken on September 13, 1945, by an American nurse who'd chosen kindness over protocol. Worn once by a woman who'd expected death and received dignity instead. Preserved for 70 years as proof that measuring tapes could mean more than measurement. Could mean mercy. Could mean hope. Could mean that even in war, even between enemies, even when propaganda screamed otherwise, humanity could surprise you. The dress would hang there for generations. Silent testimony, physical evidence, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing America could offer wasn't military might or economic strength or political ideology. Sometimes it was just clothes that fit properly and flowers embroidered on fabric, and the radical act of treating enemies like humans who deserve dignity. The measuring tape had come full circle, from tool to weapon to tool again, from terror to testimony, from September 13, 1945 to today and beyond. Standard quartermaster equipment that had become something more. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary, except when wielded with care it could save lives, could change minds, could prove that mercy was possible even when everything said it shouldn't be. That was the legacy. That was the lesson. That was why Keiko kept the dress, why her granddaughter donated it, why it hung now in a museum where millions could see and remember and understand. Measuring tapes could mean many things, but in the right hands at the right moment with the right intention, they could mean mercy, and mercy once given echoed forever.